is it covering? The breastplate is covering the heart for the sins of heirs in judgment. This had to be a perfect lamb. This isn't something that you drop off to the Salvation Army because you don't want to wear it anymore.
And I would like to introduce Dr. Harman. Dr. Terry Harman drove all the way from Indiana to be with us this evening. He has been teaching on the tabernacle for 25 years. He has researched it like no one else that I know. And I will let him introduce himself a little bit more. But please welcome Dr. Harman.
Let me see if I got any lungs. I have to try and compete with that over there, but I think God's music will win. Okay, so we're going to talk about the high priest's garments a little bit and a few other things. You got a brochure. Some of the information on the back is outdated, but the pictures and stuff are fine. If you wanted to go to the website and get more information, just put in the Google search, the Tabernacle Man, and it will come up at the website. There's about 50 some videos on YouTube. The website will take you to them, where I walk through a life-size tabernacle, explain the Levitical sacrifices, a lot of different things. I have been doing it a long time, and part of the reason why I've done it is when I read something that I don't understand, it bothers me. I don't care what book it is. If there's a word, a name of a town, an instrument or something, and I don't know what it is, it bothers me. My grandmother said that when I was a little boy and I'd play in the creek, and you know how you lift rocks up looking for the crawdads? I'd just wear myself out. I'd just have to go as far as I could. And, you know, your feet shriveling, your hands shriveling up, because I just knew there was another crawdad under the next rock. So I've always been pretty inquisitive. When I first started walking with the Lord, I was a pretty poor reader, a lot of things. I'd been to jail on drugs, in prison, living on the streets, even worked for a carnival, a traveling carnival for a while. When we'd go into town, I'd help set up the tilt-a-whirl. And then after that was set up, then I would man the machine gun, you know, where you try and shoot out the little red star on the paper. The barrels aren't crooked. They really aren't. And you do get 100 BBs in them. But there are some other tricks to make sure you don't have to give up on them stuffed animals. But I've always been inquisitive. And early in my walk, I was told, well, you don't need to read the Old Testament. That's why they call it old. It doesn't apply. We're not under law. We're under grace now. You don't need to even really know much about it. If you want to read it, it's okay, but it just doesn't apply. Well, that was pretty good until I started reading the book of Hebrews, and Jesus is referred to as high priest. He's also referred to as the Lamb of God. Well, now I got to figure out some about sheep and all that kind of stuff. And it takes me back to Exodus chapter 12 and Passover. Well, okay, so now I understand the first Passover in Egypt. And then I see Paul that says that Jesus is our Passover that's been sacrificed. And all right, now I got to go back and see if there was something I missed. You get the picture. I just had to know. And the more I had to know, the more that I tried to learn. So it led me to another thing. I had to also see it because I'm a visual person. And if I can see something, if I can make something, if I can carve something, for me, just doing that, the Bible explodes. So I first started teaching about the tabernacle with flannel graphs. Flannel. See, some of those of you that are shaking your head, you know what those are. And there used to be a flannel graph set of the whole Bible. The only thing they didn't tell you is you have to cut all those things out. Okay? Your hands are ready to fall apart. Well, I was working at an institution with the developmentally disabled. They were adults physically, but with their handicap on the cognitive level, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. And so I started with flannel graphs. And that went pretty good. So I started dressing up as characters from the Bible. And I would make costumes. And now when I look back at the pictures of them, they were pitiful. They really were. But that's all I knew how to do. And God blessed that pitiful stuff until I could learn and do better. So I am called the Tabernacle Man. I had a almost scale life-size tabernacle of Moses that I built with help of friends, carpenters, and others. I used the funds from my counseling business to get the materials and pay for help for things that I couldn't do. I searched out weavers to weave garments for me in the biblical colors, just on and on and on. I actually went back to school to try and learn some of the stage crafting so I could do some of it myself. And so I had this life-size tabernacle. It didn't get moved out much because you have to have a pretty big conference room. Just for the tabernacle tent itself, it's 45 feet long, 15 feet high, and 15 feet wide. Well, that's a pretty big structure, but you can haul it around if you can get some volunteers with strong backs. And so I did that for at least 10 years with other things that I was doing. And COVID hit. Of course, that just throws everything under the bus, right? And there was these people that would call. They called from the side of the road and shared their vision and all that. And they wanted to purchase the tabernacle I'd built. And I didn't really want to let go of it, to tell you the truth, because I'm called the Tabernacle Man. And if I have no tabernacle, then I'm just a man, right? I'm just some dude with some other stuff. And they're pretty persistent, actually kind of bothersome at times because they wanted this and they kept sharing the vision. So I'm going to tell you how it happened. Let me move him out of the way. So I went to prayer and I said, okay, God, these people really, really want to do this. They have a passion for it the way I do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go for less than it would take me to even buy the material. He placed a certain number on my heart. And so I let it go. And we made arrangements for me to bring part of it. And then I brought more today. And after they left my house, and I was sad. Really, I was brokenhearted. I questioned myself, maybe I've done something to offend God. Maybe he doesn't want me to do this anymore. My beard's gray. Maybe I'm supposed to retire, on and on and on. And so They made a deposit, and I didn't even put the check in for a couple of weeks because I thought maybe they'll change their mind. And they called, and you haven't deposited the check yet. No, I haven't. I will go ahead and deposit it. So I deposited it. That was like on a Friday. And on Saturday, I was just pretty sad. I really was. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And so I knew I'd be going to church on Sunday. And I took a portion of the deposit they gave, and I gave it to a special need at the church. And I put it in the offering. It was not a cheerful gift. It was just a gift. Just a gift, because I was sad and brokenhearted. But I knew I had to do it. But that doesn't mean it came easy. So the service, I don't even know if it was good or bad. I just know that I was there physically, but emotionally, I don't know where I was. And I go home and I check my Tabernacle Man email. And long story short, there's this guy in San Antonio, Texas, that knows these people in Merrill, Florida, who knows this 95-year-old guy near Dallas, Texas, who built a life-size tabernacle 30-some years ago and traveled around the country in a 53-foot semi-trailer. His name is Howard. And so Howard is up in age. His daughter calls me, and I can't believe. And they're going, we've tried for a couple of years to give this tabernacle away. We've approached some of the biggest ministries in the United States, and no one wants it. No one really knows what to do with it. And I said, I'll be getting on a plane here real quick. You just tell me, you just give me an address. I will be there. I will get on the plane. I'll rent a car. I'll be there. So I met, it was in Fort Victory, Texas, a Baptist church, and this 53-foot semi sat in this field the whole time during COVID. Now the brakes weren't operational, all kinds of things. I went and I saw the faded picture of the tabernacle on the side of this 53-foot trailer, and then I see this van pull up, and this old, tall, skinny guy comes out, and my name is Howard. And I go, Howard, let's talk. So we got inside the back of the trailer, and I'm just crying, just crying. And I said, nobody wanted this? Now, usually wives are a little bit smarter than husbands. And Howard said, no, we tried for a couple of years. And his wife said, that's because it had your name on it, Terry. It wasn't supposed to go to no one else. We just didn't know where you were till the other day. So I'm in there, and Howard is 95, and he's moving around through all this, and I'm sweating in the Texas sun. My knees are hurting, my back is hurting, and he's just like a 19-year-old kid popping through this thing. We sit down, and I told him, I said, I'm blown away that you would entrust this to me after you spent all this time making it. And he said, well, my days are numbered. I can't live forever, and I want this to live on. And I said, well, I've been asking God, why do you wait till I'm 65 years old to do this? I've been praying for 23 years for this very thing. I know your trailer. I've seen pictures of it. 23 years ago, I said, Lord, why not me? I'm willing. And he waits till I'm 65. And Howard looks at me and he goes, you're just a pup. I started this when I retired. This was my retirement project. So I'm in there going, I don't have nothing else to say, God. I'm just going to be quiet. If you ask me to give something away, I'm going to give it away. I'm just being quiet. And so the tabernacle that I was entrusted with prior to this now is in Champaign. And part of it is here today. That's the Ark of the Covenant that's with the display. So we got a couple of Bible verses that I want to look at. They're long, so I'm going to have you read them afterwards. But the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14, that since then we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. So Jesus is referred to as the high priest. So I want to know something about the high priest. And you go to Exodus 28, and verse 2 talks about these special garments that the kids learned about. And verse 2 says that the garments are for beauty and glory, not to Aaron the high priest or any of the high priests that follow after that, but glory and beauty of God, kind of like identification that the children learned about. So if Jesus is our high priest, maybe I need to learn a few things about the high priest and what his duties were. Well, if you look in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you see, especially in Leviticus, all the priestly duties outlined. It's kind of that book that most of us, we fall asleep when we start reading it, when we're trying to do that, whole Bible in a year plan. But he's a mediator. The high priest was a mediator between God and man, a human being, only one. And he entered into the Holy of Holies one time a year, Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, and he would sprinkle blood 7 times. There was a whole series of things that he would do. First, he would make atonement for himself and his family. Then he'd make atonement for the leadership, and then he'd go in and make atonement for the nation as a whole, the people. He ensured that the sacrifices were pure. Now, he had helpers that he appointed, but it was his responsibility to make sure that everything that was offered to God was spotless, that it was pure, that the lambs didn't have mange under their belly, or a broken limb, or a broken tooth, or something that was going to take their life soon. It was spotless. It was appropriate. And all of those offerings were to help people to draw closer to God. In fact, the Hebrew word that's often translated as sacrifices in English is korban. And korban literally means to draw near. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh unto you. So it's to draw closer to God. And that's hard for us to understand because most of us do not support our families by what we grow, what we raise. We're not in an agrarian society like we used to be. So today, the way we give is our time, our talent, and our treasure. But if that is a pure gift and it's coming from the heart, when we give money, it's our way of drawing closer to God. It's our way of saying thank you to God. Some of the best gifts are when you give your talents to your local house of worship because it saves them money, but it also helps you to draw closer to God and the community as you give your talents. It's not just your treasure, but in the world we live in today, giving our time can be the most precious. So time, talent, and treasure is the way that we draw closer to God. Now, I know that we have spiritual disciplines such as meditation, prayers, Bible reading, and those help us to draw closer to God also. So Hebrews goes on to say in the 15th verse of chapter 4, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses." So if Jesus can sympathize with our weaknesses the way the original high priest did, what are those weaknesses? Now, there's a lot that will go through our mind today, and usually we're picking out the things that we know that we did wrong. But in Judaism, even today, when they look back at the high priest, they say that even his garments were so holy that not only were they a symbol of certain things, they were a reminder of certain things, but just the presence of those garments on the high priest atoned for specific sins. So I want you to look at the high priest garments up here, and I'm going to walk you through it. Can everybody see the garments pretty good? Okay. So this comes out of the Babylonian Talmud. You can find it on the internet. You can find it in your library. But let's look at the 8 garments the high priest wore. All the other priests wore 4 white linen garments: a white turban, a white robe, white breeches. I thought my grandmother was crazy when she'd call them breeches, but it's in the King James. And that was a white linen garment that was from the waist to just above the knee to cover all the nakedness. And then there was a white sash. This one is short, but there was a white sash that wound around. It was 22 feet, Judaism tells us, to start at the waist and to cover part of the heart. 22 feet, about 2.5 inches wide, a sash. So it was more symbolic than actually holding everything together like a belt today. So that tunic was made of white linen, white symbolizing purity or holiness. And that tunic covers the whole body, And in the Talmud, it says that atoned for taking life. So when the high priest represented the people on the Day of Atonement, there were people that had taken lives, shed innocent blood. And in that society, it's a little different than today, the way things worked. Sometimes we do things complicitly, sometimes by omission. Some would say that our society here in America is committing a sin just because of our nation and all the number of abortions taking life. So when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, this white linen robe covering the body represented the sin of taking life. Now, those knee-length breeches, those pants, those were also white linen, so purity again. And those were a reminder for the high priest of the sexual transitions of the nation of Israel. The white turban at the top, also of linen, covers the head, and that was a reminder of the haughtiness, the sin of haughtiness. That white belt that I told you wrapped around for 22 feet, also white linen, purity, holiness, the waist and the heart. That was a reminder that we need atonement for the sins of the heart. Some would say the improper thoughts. I like to talk about the cravings of the flesh. We are born with certain cravings or desires or hungers, but if outside of God's law, outside of God's kingdom, we get in trouble when we feed the flesh too much. Our eyes take us to places we shouldn't be going. We get off into alcohol and drugs and all kinds of other things feeding the flesh, and we ruin our lives. The belt, as I said, partially around the waist and partially around the heart, about those cravings of the flesh. The breastplate with the 12 tribes. Now, as you can see, if you come up closer, each of the stones has in Hebrew, this is an earlier form of Hebrew, the name of the tribe. And Hebrew, you read from the right and go left. So when you're reading the Bible, you'll notice that the outline of the stones, right to left, right to left, right to left. And those are the 12 tribes. We are told that those are listed in Genesis, and we know that the colors of the stone were more important than what the stone was. The stones were chosen for their color, and their color matched the colors in the banner for each tribe. So the banners represented each of the tribes. And Genesis talks about a symbol or an emblem of what that tribe was known for, at least in God's eyes. And you'll see in some modern versions of the flags of the 12 tribes a boat, or you'll see the breastplate of Moses for the tribe of Levi. So look at where that's covering. What is it covering? The breastplate is covering the heart for the sins of heirs in judgment. The ephod, now the ephod, I got to tell you about this, because if you notice, a modern apron you tie behind, right? This one you tie in the front. When I first started trying to make some of these things, over in my area, if you go to the far east side of the state, the Amish and the Mennonite have a lot of farms and hardware stores and clothing this. And you can buy all kinds of bolts of wool and things that you might not be able to get at your Joann Fabrics. And I went over there because I wanted to find some loosely woven products, some coat wool and things like that. And I went over because my first set of garments I made out of coat wool. So it wasn't all the hand woven stuff on the loom. And so I said, well, I need a pattern to follow, just like Moses was given a pattern to follow. So I was over in the ladies section where they have all those older aprons, and I'm putting them on backwards. And I've got this long beard and I'm over there. The men are not in that section. They're over at the hardware side. You know what I'm saying? And so finally a lady, probably was Mennonite, and the head covering came over and asked if she could help me. And I said, no, I'll just kind of know it when I see it. And she goes, sir, you're putting the apron on backwards. And I said, well, I know I am. I'm trying to make one of these. And I showed her the picture of the high priest, and she goes, oh, she ran and got a couple of other ladies. I spent 3 hours. They were showing me bolts of material. They were up in attics and stuff that no one had seen. And so now when I go there, I've been there enough. They know the crazy guy with the beard, he's going to be hanging out where no one else hangs out because he's looking for particular things. But I used it as a pattern. I developed some of this using paper bags, cutting them, the good part out, and taping them together and making pieces of this so I'd have a pattern to follow for the right size. But the backwards apron is called an ephod. Now, sometimes people think this is the ephod, but this is the breastplate with the stones on it. The ephod, why would they have an apron type thing? Well, symbolically, he's over all the sacrifices. When you're cooking and preparing things at a big grill, you wear an apron, right? So very practical. But because this ephod is used in the ceremony of offering sacrifices or korban to God, this reminded them that they needed atonement. They needed forgiveness for the sins of idolatry, worshiping the created instead of the creator. Now, the blue robe is my favorite one. The blue robe here, solid blue. Blue's the color of heaven, of the sky. And, metaphorically, we say heaven is up and there's where God is. Well, the blue robe, if you read in Exodus chapter 28, it talks about that the neck portion going around was doubled over. And when you come up here later and take a picture, you'll see that it's doubled over and it almost looks like two lips that are closed together. Guess what the blue robe was to remind the high priest of? Needing atonement for evil speech, for the gossip, Or as my grandma said, if you can't say anything good, just don't say anything. Okay? If you can't say anything good, just don't say anything. So just keep your mouth shut, Terry, is what she would tell me. Keep your mouth shut. So it looks like two lips that are tight together. Now the crown, you see the gold crown that's held with the blue wool ribbon here? In Hebrew, it says, holy unto the Lord. Look where it's at. On the forehead. On the forehead. So your thoughts, your arrogance needs to be submitted to God. If we're not careful, we'll think all our accomplishments are because of something we've done. Deuteronomy tells me that God is the one who gives me the ability to make wealth. Either the strength to do it, the idea that someone else doesn't have it, the ingenuity to plan, implement something and make a company, whatever it is, or to excel in whatever company we're in, or our own business. That is not just natural talent. God is the one that gives us the ability to make wealth. But if we're not careful, we'll just get all arrogant with ourselves, thinking, yeah, I'm all that. I can do this. And I think it's one of the Proverbs that says pride comes before the fall. And if you look at many successful people, I'll talk primarily about men, very successful men, whether it's in ministry, in politics, or in business, or other walks of life, they're where everybody else just dreams of going, and then all of a sudden, they're in all kind of trouble because they didn't take care of certain areas in their life, and they started getting haughty, started getting arrogant, thinking they were all that, and that the rules didn't apply to them. So if we understand that the high priest garments symbolized a number of different sins, 8 different sins that people struggle with, if Jesus is our high priest and he understands our struggles, the Bible says, but he was without sin. So he is qualified to judge us. He is qualified to forgive us of these things. He understands that we struggle, but we still got to go to him. So let me take this a little bit further. If Jesus is our high priest, let me talk to you about one other thing the high priest and his appointees had to do. And for this, I'm going to need some help. So, help me. Young man, what's your name? Douglas? Zachary. Zachary? Okay. So I want you to grab that one chair, okay? On this side here, because I'm going to show you what to do. Let me show you too. We got to carry it like a baby. Chair? Yeah, chair. Oh, okay. So like that. And then you hand it to me, okay? And then the other one. Okay? Yeah, I'm still a kid at heart. I love show and tell. You can help in a moment, too.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
I thought you were the altar you would die.
Well, if this was the real art, it would, but this is a PG art. Yeah, in real life, yes.
If you touch the real ark, you will die.
Yes. This is not the real one.
I'm just wondering how they get it off.
Say what?
I was wondering how they get it off.
There was always holes in it, and actually in Exodus it says that of all the furniture, the poles had to remain in the ark. And the reason why the poles were in there, you'll notice my poles are on this side. That's the ribs, that's the side, not this long way stuff. And 4 would carry it on their shoulders because they were supposed to carry or shoulder the burden of the law. And they were always supposed to carry it. It was supposed to be covered. Numbers will tell you there's certain coverings for it. And they kind of got in a hurry and they put it on a cart. It was never supposed to be carted, only carried. Sounds kind of harsh, but someone forfeited their life. All right, so I need 2 men now. 2 men. 2 men. You got to be able to lift high. All right. 2 women that can lift. It's pretty heavy. Yeah, Mika, you remember how here, you can hand me the, okay, so show him how to grab that. Yeah, each grab one. And come on up in the front, and then we'll then slide it up here, okay? This ark has traveled all around the country. This is the last time it'll be in my vehicle. The rest of the furniture is in their house. All right. So, I told you that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Now, I know that you've heard this rumor that he went in with a rope tied around his ankle. If you can find that in the Bible, I will give you $1,000. You're not going to find it. It's not in the Bible. It's not in Josephus. It's not in Edersheim. It's not in any of the Jewish writings that you would think about. There's one place from around the 12th century in some esoteric kind of mystical writings in the Kabbalah that talks about a gold chain. One phrase. And from that, some people through the ages have developed this whole story. And if you look in some of the reference Bibles or the study Bibles in the footnote, they'll repeat that story. It's not true, folks. It's not true. All you got to do is just read the Bible, read Leviticus chapter 16, and you will see that when he went into the Holy of Holies, he just wore the 4 white garments. The 4 white garments. But people like that story. So he went in with the 4 white garments, and he brought blood in a series of rituals. And one of the things that he did on the east side of the atonement cover, okay, this here box is where the 10 Commandments were, Aaron's rod, the pot of manna Hebrews talks about. But this is the mercy seat. And he would apply blood 7 times, not slinging it, but just flick it from his fingers. 7 times on the mercy seat. So if you think about it, God in heaven is looking down. Inside this box, this safety deposit box, is the covenant, the contract between God and humans. There's his wall, there's his standard. He's looking down. In Jewish thought, the broken tablets are also in there. The broken tablets are also in there. But as he looks down, he looks through the blood. And mercy is applied. Because all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, why is that important? Remember, Jesus is the high priest, right? Book of Hebrews says. So the high priest goes in. But why are we worried about 7 times? Work with me here. How many wounds did Jesus have? 7. Crown of thorns? 1. Whipping his back? 2. Nails in this hand? Wrist? 3. Nails in this one? 3. Both feet? 5, 6. What's the 7th wound? Spear in the side. Okay? Now I want you to think in the Gospels. I'm not going to tell you where it's at. It's in one place, but I want you to read the resurrection stories. If you read closely, what you will hear is that there were 2 angels at the head and the foot of where Jesus laid on that slab. The blood would have oozed out, the 7 wounds, and there's 2 angels. It's a picture of the Ark of the Covenant, making atonement for our sins. So Jesus, our high priest, went to heaven for our sins to be canceled. He had to die, and he rose again. He is our high priest, and he knows our suffering. So let's look at what would happen more on a regular basis, because it's going to be connected with this sign. Now, the sign is from the New Testament. The sign is in all the Gospels. This one happens to be written the way John would have wrote it, and we're going to look at it here in a moment, all right? The sign above the cross. So here's what would happen. You got to pretend that I'm the high priest, or I'm all dressed in white, and someone is bringing their atonement offering for their family, for their clan. This is the head of the family, and he brings a lamb to be inspected. Stand to my left, if you would, and hold the lamb and face the people. So he brings his korban. He brings his offering. He brings that tangible thing to draw closer to God. He realizes that he or his family have erred. They've walked. They've been astray from God. There is this blemish that needs to be blotted out. There is this sin that needs to be atoned for. And he brings a sheep. Well, when he gets to the gate of the tabernacle, he is stopped, and he's asked some questions about his offering. You are representing what family?
Culver family?
The Culver family. Is this your lamb?
Yes, it is.
This is a lamb that you've personally taken care of?
Yes.
You didn't buy this lamb off of someone to take a shortcut?
No.
You've raised this lamb.
Correct.
Is this lamb got any blemishes?
Not that I am aware.
So he would inspect it and make sure that this was a healthy lamb, that there was no eye infection, no bugs growing in the ears, no mange on the belly, no weaknesses. This had to be his best. This had to be a perfect lamb. This isn't something that you drop off to the Salvation Army because you don't want to wear it anymore. This is not something you donate to Goodwill because you have no use of it anymore and you're trying to get a little tax credit or to make your heart feel good. No, this was your best. Now, there isn't sacrificial offerings today because there's no temple that exists. And so my mind goes, what would get God's attention more? What would get our attention if there was a temple and we still practice this old form of worship? I think he'd have us bring our cell phones. Oh, no, wait, no. You mean the one I put in the drawer, that BlackBerry I don't use anymore? How about what was it before we got all the HD stuff? How about that analog one? I have a computer that has 70 megabytes of hard drive. How about that? No, I want you to pick out the brand new one that anyone would want. That's the one that's going to get your attention. I'll know that you're really trying to draw close to me. Now, I know we don't do that today, but that's what this meant. This is something he could sell. This is something he could keep his family alive with. He could feed his family from this. And yet, this is the one that he culls out of his flock. And they watch it. They take care of it. Because they're going to Jerusalem. They're going to the temple. They got to make sure that this will represent their family well. What is that you have around its neck there? I'll help him out. So this one I just made out of red wool. No, nothing special with the color. But you see there's this copper tag. There was a tradition, and didn't necessarily have to be copper, but because there'd be so many thousands and thousands of people coming to the temple, you want to make sure that your lamb is your lamb. You want to make sure your family is represented and yours don't get mixed up with someone else's offering. So you would carve either on wood or a piece of metal your family's name. because this represents your heart before God. Now, the interesting thing is in the tabernacle, women and children weren't allowed inside the courts like they were later with Herod's temple. Only the man with the blessing, only the one representing the family. And can you imagine if he took, Tim, what's your son's name again? Daniel? Took Daniel to the tabernacle and they took Fluffy. Daniel's probably combed it. Daniel's given its name. Daniel loves this lamb and he's with his daddy, with his father, and they're off to the tabernacle and it's got its name tag, its ID tag. Daddy goes in, he comes out. Daniel wants to know, where's Fluffy at? And then Dad has to explain why Fluffy had to give its life, to give of its blood, to atone for the things that the family had done wrong. This tag here represented his family because it's his lamb. Above the cross, there was a sign. The Romans meant it as an embarrassment. When the Romans would carve, or generally we believe they put some chalky white type substance across any old piece of board and then take charcoal from a fire, a stick, and they'd write the crime of the individual. This one was a murderer. This one was a thief. And they put the charge that they were condemned for. Pilate had on this one, here's was Jesus' crime. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It made Caiaphas so upset. In a passion play, I play Caiaphas. And it comes out of the Bible, and one of my lines is, when I see this, I go to Pilate and I go, do not say he was the King of the Jews. Say he claimed to be the King of the Jews. Because I'm incensed. I'm the high priest. There's only one high priest at a time. One has to die before the new one comes. And Pilate said, what is written? It's written. It stays. Not changing. So why did Caiaphas get so upset? Well, the first language is in Hebrew, probably Aramaic. All the characters are the same of Aramaic and Hebrew. It's kind of like I'm speaking English. My relatives in West Virginia speak English too, but you know it's different, right? And in the middle was Latin. And in the middle was Latin, and at the bottom is Greek. The Hebrew or Aramaic is for the religious people, the Jews. The Latin in the middle is the language of the government, the language of those in power, the language of those that are in control, the Romans. And the Koine Greek at the bottom is the language of business, of commerce. It's kind of the language of the world. The sign is saying to the religious of that day, to the powers to be of that day, and of the businesses, commerce, and trade, this is Jesus, King of the Jews. But why was Caiaphas so upset? Because even today, the way we learn things, and back then, if you take the first letter of each of the 4 words written on the sign in John's Gospel, Yod, He, Vav, He, is the 4-letter name of God. It's the name that's used 86 times in the book of Leviticus, always associated with the duties of the priest and the offerings, the korban. So as the people brought their lamb with their family name on it, the real message was, God said, this is Jesus, the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. This is my offering. So I shared a little bit with you. The Old Testament, yes, it is an older covenant, But if you understand the history, the culture of then, much of the New Testament just explodes. You don't need a commentary. Dig in the Word. It will feed you. It is a good book. It is a good book. It will change your life even if you just read it. It will help you work through things that I can't. I've earned my living counseling people in prisons, jails, drug rehabs, and all that. And I'm smart enough to know that my words can help most people with some things. But there's some things that only a word from God can get into that part of the heart and heal it and forgive it. I can't forgive sin. I mean, I can forgive someone that's injured me, but I can't change the heart. Only God. So there is so much in the Bible. There is so much in the tabernacle. I'll leave you with this. There's a lot about the tabernacle, and it keeps repeating the pattern that was shown Moses. The pattern that was shown Moses. Follow the pattern that I showed you. And if you read in Leviticus, when they inaugurated the tabernacle, when the pattern was right, the fire fell. And that's what we need in our churches and house of worship today. Thank you for giving me your time.